Welcome to the 2021 Leicestershire and Rutland Recorders Conference. My name is John Clarkson and I'm Head of Conservation for the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust as we host this year's event. I'll quickly cover the morning's agenda in a moment, but it's been a roller coaster ride, hasn't it, since the last conference held 2 years ago now, with some fantastic wildlife records in the meantime. Examples such as new species of Odonata across the county, breeding stone chats for the first time at one of our nature reserves, and the 150th osprey chick from the reintroduction of ospreys to Rutland water. I'm sure you'll all have your own personal favourites, of course. But it's also been a tragic last 12 months, which has touched all of our lives in different and challenging ways. And we thought it right that we should take a moment to reflect upon that. A moment's reflection for people and wildlife recorders who've passed away in the meantime. Some are listed here, and there are many and others who are not mentioned. So with today's talks, what we have is the first presentation from Dr Helen O'Brien on the mammals of Leicestershire and the recording that's been undertaken over the last few years. We'll then have an update on the BSB plant atlas from Steve Woodward and Geoffrey Hall before we hear and celebrate 10 years, the first 10 years of Naturespot, fantastic project, a presentation from Alan Cann and Dave Nichols, the founder. We then hear from Tom Bennett, exploring the work on Nathusius pipistrelle at Rutland Water, before we finish with a quick presentation from Claire Sambridge, who's the Soren Reek Valley Living Landscapes Officer. I hope that you enjoy the conference. I hope that you find it stimulating, and I hope that you can look forward to a fantastic year of wildlife recording. Thank you. Folks, if you're happy, we'll go into a presentation from Dr Helen O'Brien on Leicestershire's mammals.
Okay, morning everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me and you can see the screen in front of you. Today's talk I'm going to give is on Leicestershire and Rutland mammals, and I would like to say first of all that it's a great honour to be here and to be part of this virtual meeting. I have to say, as I've got a bit of time to spare, that some of the people that were on the list that John presented to us a few minutes ago, I wasn't aware that they had passed away. So it's very, very sad times, but their legacy will certainly live on, and they were great contributors to some of the mammal records over the last few decades, so they certainly won't be forgotten about. Okay, so Leicestershire and Rutland mammals, the things that I'm going to talk about is really looking at the status, the conservation status of the mammals, and whether we should be worried about what the current trends are, looking at both sort of a national picture and also looking at the local VC 55 area, which covers the Leicestershire and Rutland area. Looking at some species in particular, some that might be doing quite well, others that we do need to be concerned about, and what we're doing to record those species, and what we're doing with some of that data. And just touching on at the end, providing I've got time to do that, with some of the projects that we've been doing around the area and where we hope to carry on doing the good work in the future. So I'm going to start off with quite a colourful slide here, but actually the message that it's putting across is quite a serious one. This is around a piece of work that the Mammal Society completed last year, and what they were asked to do was actually try and look at the number of terrestrial mammals in the UK and what their status was in terms of how threatened they were. They looked at the whole of the 4 countries, and on the screen we've just got England, because obviously that's most relevant to us. They used a set of criteria, and they used 4 criteria in which to make their assessments. And the first thing that they looked at was whether the population was actually declining. The next criteria was whether their range was actually declining, so their distribution across the area. The third was whether it was actually a small population of that species group, and that was also in decline. And then how isolated that group was and how restricted it was. So putting those 4 criteria together, they then worked their magic with the maths and came up with a set of criteria, which was based on the international criteria and the information that we're probably used to seeing in terms of whether a species is critically endangered or vulnerable, etc. And it was actually quite startling and quite quite stark news that actually one of the headlines is that 1 in 4 species is threatened with extinction in England, and out of the 45 species that we have, then 19 of those species are in severe trouble. That essentially means that within the next 20 to 40 years, we're likely to lose 2 to 4 mammals that we know about. And on the screen here, we've got beautiful animals here that we've already lost. We've lost the wolf and we've lost the wild cat here in England. And there's several others that are obviously going to be lost if we don't do anything about it. One thing that I'm going to stress at this moment is that although I'm talking about the mammals of Leicestershire and Rutland, I'm not actually going to be talking about bats. And you might think that's a bit strange because obviously they're a huge species group, but to do them justice, with the number of species of bats that we've got and the types of habitats that they require and the different behaviours that they have, I think it's a whole different, certainly a different discussion to be had. Unfortunately, we've got Tom later on that's going to be talking about one particular species of bat, but we'll be addressing some of the ecology, no doubt. So my focus really here today is to look at generally at the other terrestrial mammals that we've got in the county area. What I did with the data, having got used to the fact that we're in danger of actually losing several of our most vulnerable species, I separated it out into species groups and looked at which ones that we might actually have here in BC 55 to help us prioritise some of that work that we want to do in the future. Quite interestingly, the mammals that are in the most vulnerable status, on the screen, they are the ones that are in italics and in a sort of greyed out text, are actually the ones that don't that are not present in our county areas. So that actually supports a lot of what the Mammal Society have found already, that the distribution of these particular species, such as the pine marten, the mountain hare, and the red squirrel, are already severely limited. And the fact that they're not in the middle of the country means that there's a huge hole there. However, in VC 55, we do have 29 species of mammals, and out of those, 1 species is endangered, which is the water vole. 2 are classified as vulnerable, which are the hedgehog and the dormouse, and 3 are predicted to decline in the future, and they are the water shrew, the harvest mouse, and believe it or not, the European rabbit. So the next thing I did was actually look at some of the data sets that we've got, and the data I've collected is from the Record Centre, and it's a huge asset that we've got here in the county, where we can gather the data from a large number of sources and get the most comprehensive data set that we can to start doing our analysis. In picking a time, a spatial time or temporal time to actually study the data, I picked the year 2000 and divided the data into the records that we got since recording began up to the year 2000 and then post 2000. And part of the reason for that was simply to do with technology, because really, I guess before 2000, we relied mainly on seeing a species or finding their field signs, and we might use Longworth traps and other techniques to try and record our mammals. And largely that had not changed for a number of decades. After 2000, then we all started carrying mobile phones, wildlife cameras became quite common use, static recorders, you know, you name it, we were trying to use it. And with that, instead of actually having that occasion when we might just happen to come across a rabbit scurrying across the field, we were able to actually monitor stuff up to 24 hours a day. And so consistently, when I looked at the data sets, I found that the number of species actually recorded had significantly increased post 2000 as opposed to pre 2000. If we were to look at that and take it just at face value, then it would appear that, yeah, we're doing okay. All these species have increased, they're doing all right, you know, nothing to worry about. But when you actually look at the distribution records across the two counties, then you can actually see quite starkly that there are some changes in distribution, and that actually the likelihood is that in most cases it is due to the number of people that are recording the species and the type of technology used that has accounted for this increase. There are, however, a few exceptions to this, and if I move my cursor over to the carnivore graph in the top left-hand corner, then you can see that the otter has significantly increased post 2000. As many of you will know that in the 1920s, 1930s, the otter nearly became extinct from persecution, and it was reintroduced into the two counties, sorry, not into the two counties, into neighbouring counties around about the late 1980s, early 1990s. And since then, it has colonised really well within Leicestershire and Rutland. And you know, it's on all our most of our watercourses in our towns and cities, and it can be readily seen during the day. So I would say that is a genuine increase in the distribution and the numbers of otters. Likewise, if we move across to the deer categories over here, we can see a significant increase in the muntjac deer. Very few records pre-2000, although it was probably under-recorded before that time. Post-2000, it seems to have made its magic way across the county. It's quite a discreet animal, it's quite small, it uses hedgerows and railway lines and canal towpaths to just, you know, make its way quietly and quickly along to have really established itself across most of the county. Likewise with the Rhodia, very few Rhodia were actually recorded pre-2000. And most of them were towards the east side of the county and towards Rutland. We had hardly any at all recorded in the west part of Leicestershire, and yet now we have quite significant populations, certainly towards the west and the northwest, and it seems that they've possibly migrated over from sort of the Derbyshire area, or they could have always been here in small numbers, but just not recorded. And similarly with the fallow deer, again making their way in from the east quite nicely, and also the west and to the north around the sort of Staunton Herald area. We're picking up quite a few records around there now. And I think this is likely to increase with the National Forest and the maturity of the woodland. So we're getting that increased cover, which obviously the deer will like. Other records like the insectivores, the shrew records are quite low, difficult species to spot, difficult to identify, and the moles, I think, largely go, if we see lots and lots of molehills, but it's a common species, and I think generally they go under recorded because people aren't concerned about them. They're seen as a pest more than a species that requires conservation. And the rabbits and hares, interestingly, we're getting more and more numbers recorded, possibly because people are more aware of the need to record, and often they get captured on the wildlife cameras as well, which might account for some of their the new records. The issue is around, I think, the rabbit, in that it's seen as being extremely common, and yet the Mammal Society data has shown that the number of records is actually declining, and so there is a suggestion that the species is also declining. So I'm just going to move on to a number of species that are considered to be vulnerable or endangered within our area. And the first one is the water vole, which is considered to be endangered. And if I can just look and point you in the right direction for the water vole data on the graph, which is this area here, what it actually shows is that pre-2000, we had around about 480 records. Post-2000, we had about 450. So really not too much difference in the number of observations we've had of the species. But actually, when we look at the two distribution charts down here, we've got pre-2000 where the distribution was largely along the Soar, sort of going up through the middle of Leicestershire here, and also up towards the northern part of the counties here and neighbouring onto Nottinghamshire, and a fairly wide sort of widespread distribution generally across the smaller watercourses throughout Leicestershire and into Rutland. Take it post-2000, and actually you can very readily see the changes here. We no longer have that stretch through along the Soar, stretching up to the north part. They seem to have disappeared largely from the northern area here. And we've got a great big gap here. You can see off towards the southeast. And yet we did have small isolated populations in that area previously. So it might be that these populations are still hanging out and nobody's actually just gone to see whether those species are still there or not. Or they could have disappeared because of them being isolated and being under pressure. The types of records have probably changed also post-2000. A lot of the records received at the Record Centre are from ecology consultants dealing with applications for development, and that in itself can be an issue. But the way that they record species is that every latrine, every burrow, obviously every sighting is recorded. So what we might get is an increased number of records, but not necessarily the distribution, reflecting that distribution. Whereas I think pre-2000, it was a lot more generalised, and we got a lot, members of the public and various projects going on, where we could record maybe one or two field signs, but over a greater area. But certainly it does, this information does reflect just how vulnerable this species is. Another species that is in severe trouble, I think, within our own area is the Dormouse, another endearing species, always been quite poorly recorded across the two counties. And certainly since 2000, we have only 2 records of the Dormouse within the Fine Shades area in Northamptonshire and in Pickworth Greatwood. And in Pickworth, they've been reintroduced there. So they've been struggling for a while, but actually their classification in generally across England is that they're only classed as vulnerable, whereas actually within our own county areas, I would classify it as them being certainly endangered, if not in danger of becoming extinct. The neighbouring counties have all done reintroduction programmes, and they are surviving quite naturally in the southern counties, where they're more they've got a better type of habitat, and also the climate is probably more capable of supporting them. I think it's always been accepted that the Midlands is probably on the edge of their distribution range in any case, but certainly there's more room to try and find out what these species are doing, where they are, whether there's any remnant populations, and whether we have the ability to help their conservation here. And last but not least, really, in talking about specific species, is the hedgehog. Again, classed as a vulnerable species on a national basis, but when you look at the number of records that we've got post 2000, you know, it's significantly increased. And when we look at the distribution maps between pre and post 2000, we can certainly see that we've got a glut largely within the Leicester area, where we've had a series of projects which has helped people to identify with the hedgehog, a very easily identifiable species and couldn't be mistaken in any case, but also to relate it to visits to urban gardens and to local parks, and really to sort of try and relate to that species. And as a result of that, it's probably resulted in multiple recordings, you know, between gardens of that same species of hedgehog that travels around. Number of roadkills, you know, certainly gets reported, and this can sometimes skew the data and make it look like actually our population of hedgehogs, certainly within our county, is doing okay. I would like to say though that thanks to the Leicester Hedgehog Rescue and now the Leicestershire Hedgehog Rescue Society, they have done an incredible amount of work in helping with the conservation of this species. And so actually we might have a higher number of this species in our county than in other parts of the UK, but certainly it's one that that continues to be a cause of concern, and we shouldn't take it for granted about how well they're doing in our area. So really we're always looking for ideas and information about projects, but we want those projects to have a purpose, and largely the projects in the past have been about understanding how many species we've got out there, what is their abundance, how well are they distributed, are they connected with certain types of habitats and the management of those habitats, and are those habitats in trouble? Is there a particular species that is being predated on, or being persecuted by, and what is the connectivity between the habitat types, and can they easily get from one area to another? So lots of national projects have been taking place. You might have been involved in some of them, like the Project Splatter, the tennis balls to try and record the number of harvest mice, and the national hedgehog surveys. They've been many and varied, some with some good success and some with less success, but they've all been successful in getting people involved. At a local level, we've used certainly our own environmental resource centre, and we've that used to be involved with a number of training events in the county area, and we've linked in with that in the past. We're lucky enough to have Naturespot, and certainly Dave and Alan will be telling us all the good things that have been happening over the last 10 years. But certainly from a mammal recording point of view, it's brought recording to the masses, and that's the great thing about it. It's made it accessible and it's made it easy. And as a result of that, year on year, we've been getting more and more mammal records from that resource. The Mammal Tracker is a phone app that has been produced by the Mammal Society, and they've just recently, just in the last week or so, upgraded it. So now you can not only identify and record individual species of mammals, but you can actually set it at the start of a walk or at the start of a survey, and it will actually track the whole route that you take. And the reason for that is so that they can see whether the types of habitats where you don't record mammals is just as important as the areas that you do record mammals, so that they will be able to analyse that data and see where the distribution is and where the work needs to be prioritised. We also have a number of mammal groups in the 2 counties that have greatly contributed to species data. The Badger group, the Bat group, and the Hedgehog rescue group that I've already mentioned. And we have the fledgling Leicestershire and Rutland mammal group, which is looking at mammals generally across the county. So great resources there for everybody to plug into. And I'd just like to finish with this final slide, just to say there's no shortage of information out there. There's really no excuse to not record mammals and not to take an interest in them. And there's just a few links here that I've put together with some of that fantastic information that's out there for people to use. So that's it, and thank you very much for listening.
Helen, that's truly awesome. Thank you very much. That set a really high bar for the rest of the day. Lots of fantastic stuff there, and obviously a very, very mixed picture for mammals, which is a great concern, isn't it? So thank you for that, folks. One of the things I forgot to mention in all of the user error at the start was that for the question and answer session, if you wouldn't mind using the chat button at the bottom of your screen, depending on the system that you're using, you should find there's a little balloon that has a chat on it, or on 3 dots, and you'll be able to draw that up. And if you can pose your questions by text in the chat button, chat box, then we will take those later on. Okay, so let's look forward to the next section then, which is an update on the plant atlas from Geoffrey Hall and Steve Woodward. Geoffrey, are you okay? You ready to go?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Steve starts.
Yeah, I should be starting. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to be talking about the Atlas 2020 project. Atlas 2020 is a national project to remap the wildflowers and ferns across the British Isles. And the sponsoring organisation is the BSBI, who have actually been around this exercise twice before, so they know what they're doing. So the new Atlas is going to be based on records made between 2000 and 2019. Many Leicestershire and Rutland botanists have been contributing to this project, but for a few of us, it has dominated our lives for the past few years. On the 31st of December 2019, the last records were submitted and we could breathe a sigh of relief. Now, you've all seen maps like this with showing which grid squares contain the plant of interest. And in this case, I've chosen to show purple milkvetch, Astragalus danicus. We worked hard to find this in Leicestershire and Rutland, and personally, I think I only saw one plant of it in Rutland. As naturalists, we know that many plants are in decline and demand conservation action, but it would be hard to make a case for conserving a plant without knowing exactly where it occurs and what its population trends are. Distribution maps like these, based on up-to-date quality assured records are essential for understanding and conserving our wildlife. With modern technology, maps are far easier to produce than they ever were before. With the click of a mouse, you can change the scale or the style of your dots or squares or whatever. But you still have to put on your boots and go and look in every square. And that's a discipline which has become known as square bashing. And for my half of the talk, I'll talk about two aspects of it. First of all, field work within the constraints of a grid square. And secondly, interpreting the results. And then Geoffrey will take over and report on some recent findings and concluding remarks. Leicestershire botanists know that good places for wildflowers are pretty thin on the ground. The best places are certainly nature reserves and SSSIs, such as this one at Kendall's Meadow. But if atlas maps are to show genuine distribution rather than just where botanists like to go, then the unpopular areas need some attention too. So the hotspots, nature reserves and whatever have already been well recorded, so we haven't been going there. Square bashing means forcing yourself to look in ordinary farmland like this, in suburbia, on industrial estates, and the scruffy corners of towns. As Geoffrey will explain shortly, goodies do turn up. Now, square bashing is not everybody's cup of tea, I know, but a few of us find it curiously addictive. To guide us where to go, we maintained a map of all the squares. The basic recording unit is the Tetrad, or 2 by 2 kilometre grid square, of which there are 717 full or partial squares across the counties. And that's a good size for making a county atlas. The colours on the map there indicate survey coverage assessments. So if 400 species have ever been recorded for a square, but only 300 have been seen since 2000, then the coverage is assessed as 75%. And according to the BSBI, 75% is the threshold for a well-recorded tetrad. So we've coloured those green. Okay. The larger squares are 10 kilometre squares, which are called hectads. And hectads are a good size for a national map because, well, basically tetrads are too small to be visible. So the lists, the species lists from all 25 tetrads in a hectad are merged, and the statistical boffins at the BSBI have decreed that the minimum desirable coverage is 5 green tetrads per hectad. So our principal aim then was to get every hectad adequately covered by the end of 2019. And by March 2018, when this map was produced, you can see the coverage is fairly uneven. It's very good in Leicester, where many botanists live. Good around the Charnwood Forest area, where there's lots of nature reserves, and excellent around the Sapcote area, where Graham Kalo lives. So our target areas were West Leicestershire, North East Leicestershire, and Rutland, where there seem to be very large gaps. Also in my sights were those irritating blue and pink squares with less than 20% coverage. We used a mapping tool called Qgis, which some of you may remember was demonstrated at one of these conferences a few years ago. And we set it up to pull in data from the BSBI's database, and we topped it up with a spreadsheet of our recent local records. Now, this method was only possible because Geoffrey was so efficient at updating the BSBI database. And I've got a unwelcome pop-up on my screen, which I'm trying to get rid of. There we go. Yeah, that's where I want to be. So here are a couple of typical target tetrads with poor access. Finding a circular route is often impossible. These are a couple of tetrads near Waltham on the Wold. So 72W is intensively farmed. It's got a busy A road through it and very few minor roads and footpaths. Roadsides are usually pretty dull, often unpleasant and sometimes just too dangerous to walk. 82B is a bit better. It's got a few lanes and footpaths. However, there's no access to those woods and those lakes. With so many places to get round, it wasn't really practical to track down landowners in unfamiliar areas to get permission. That's probably only worthwhile if we suspect there's something really interesting on a particular site, and I think 1 or 2 examples of that will be coming up in Geoffrey's half. So they're the walks that we managed to get on those sites. So, and these are the percentages we ended up with, coverage percentages. So less than 75% means grumpy Steve, and more than 75% means happy Steve. Well, footpaths in Leicestershire are generally well marked and maintained, but there are a few exceptions. These sharpened spikes and concrete tank traps and razor wire are not a scene from World War I. They're actually a public footpath at Nailston. Many properties make it abundantly clear that they don't want visitors, and I know that people want privacy, and there's a problem with rural crime, but I get the impression of paranoia on some farms. I'm sure that landowners were more relaxed back in when we were working on the Atlas 2000 project. Having to keep strictly to footpaths can be a problem. When the only circular route around the Tetrad is impassable, such as this winter day in Cropston, it surely affects the plant list. We did carry on through the winter, yes. There are so many Tetrads to get round. It was a year-round job. To hit our coverage target, required one last excursion to Rutland on the 28th of December. And this time, our route was blocked by a field of porridge. Helen, as a reluctant botanist, was relieved that the Atlas 2020 era was coming to an end. Well, fieldwork has changed in the last 20 or 30 years, in my experience. Botanists in the past would unofficially sniff around a demolition site like this without upsetting anybody and probably pick up a few unusual weeds. Alas, these days they tend to be fenced off. Quarries used to be happy hunting grounds as well. In the 1980s, I used to accompany Edith Hesselgreaves around Groovy Quarry simply by asking the quarry manager, Sid, as we went in. But nowadays it's much harder to get access to places like this, although not impossible. Guy Messenger had a permit to botanise on the working railways in the 1960s when he was doing the flora of Rutland. Now, if we asked Network Rail these days, they'd fall about laughing. So I'm sure that paranoia about walkers, health and safety regulations will affect the results of Atlas 2020. Right, so I'm finished now with a couple of warnings on the interpretation of the resulting maps. So if you look at the National Atlas and blow up the Leicestershire area, you see that every Leicestershire hectare is filled, mostly bright red, for this plant Bethany, which gives the impression of a common and widespread plant with recent records. But a closer look at the same data at the tetrad scale reveals a very different picture. My home square is arrowed there. It's bright red, yes, on the basis of a tiny population, which is more or less fills the photograph there in one meadow, Raleigh. The reality is that Bethany, as a meadow specialist, has declined massively, and amalgamating records into bigger squares seems to inflate the distribution of rare plants. So beware of that when you're looking at these maps. Does a blank on the map mean the plant is not there? Well, of course, it's impossible to find every plant, but in the process of getting the coverage figure up to 75% or better, most species will surely be found. Naive ecologists looking at this map of Rosa obtusifolia, trying to interpret this in terms of geology, or climate will be scratching their heads. What you need to know is that rose identification is difficult and requires specialists. The pink block covering Leicestershire and Rutland is where Tony Primavesi worked in the 1970s. Cheshire was well worked in the 2000s by Graham Kay. You can see that Nottinghamshire is well recorded recently, and the Worcestershire domain of national expert Roger Maskew is clear. So the blanks in this case are where the rose specialists have not set foot. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll now hand over to Geoffrey.
Hello, good morning everyone. Steve's going to be advancing the slides, so I'll be asking to do it as we go through. As Steve said, we didn't look at the very well studied nature reserves and triple SIs. We spent a lot of our time traipsing around farmland and going up and down roads and getting blown over by oncoming traffic. So I'm just going to talk about 3 of these poorly recorded habitats: road verges, farmland, and urban amenity and brownfield sites, and tell you some of the surprises that turned up on these sites. Hey, Steve. Okay, Steve.
You got it?
Nice, here's a nice, beautiful verge in. So I'm going to start talking about road verges. Now, here's an excellent road verge in Hoover Lane in Rutland, and Steve. That made Steve very happy. So here he is again, this lovely flowery verge. Now this contrasted, of course, with the next slide, which is London Road in Great Glen, which really wasn't very good at all. And this, of course, made Steve very unhappy. And there he is, being very grumpy. However, whatever the state of the verges was, there were some quite interesting surprises. Steve? On one of the roadside verges at Breedon, we found the biggest surprise of all, the first county record of the lizard orchid. Next one, please. Next one, please. Yeah,
there's a delay of a couple of seconds, Geoffrey.
Okay. Okay. Now this verge is now protected and is mown carefully by North West Leicestershire District Council. But as you can see here, Steve, the plant just escaped mowing by about 6 inches. So that really was a very close shave, but it is spreading here, which is good news. Now at Leicester at Foss Park, we found some very interesting plants along an urban road verge, which also had some very interesting finds. Okay, this little area here had musk stalkspill, Erodin muscatum, which is a plant that's spreading up from the south. Next one. Also at Meridian Business Park, on this area here by these cars, we found this plant. This is the Hoary Sancphar, which you can also find at Croft. This is very rare in the county, but it was spreading along this verge very nicely. So these urban verges can be just as good as the countryside ones. Now some plants are spreading along road verges. This is a map of Danish scurvy grass, Cochlea danica. It's increased from 10 tetrads in 2000, mostly on ballast, along railways, to 226 now along roadsides. And we did a lot of work here trying to get good records in, so that we could show that the spread is following the main A roads, the M1, the A47, the A6 and the A46. Now, good verges are quite rare in for VC55, and poor are very much more common, which is really the effect of the management on the verge. This species-rich verge near Ticking Coat is mown regularly and has a very good flora. But these sad verge of woe at South Crowston isn't mowed very often. It has a lot of nitrogen deposition and so has a very poor flora. However, suburban areas can also have some interesting surprises. So here we are in suburban Wigston, where we found some knotted hedge parsley on Newton Lane, something I wasn't really expecting to find at all. There's a very good population of it there. Again, it's quite a rare plant in the county, maybe mostly over in the east, but can appear in suburban areas, so I think it's imported. On to farmland. Farmland is very variable in quality. At the top left here, we have some of the best areas at Hamilton with nice floral edges. And down at the bottom right, we have Galby, which is just a massive, intensively farmed land. So the intensification of farming is changing the farming landscape, and certainly changing the flora, what we find there. Not only does it change the flora, it changed the nitrogen application and fertilizers, runs off into watercourses and changes those as well. So we tend to find often just these tall nitrophiles, the Sparganium erectum, the branch burr reed, and in this case, just a lot of slime. But there were some surprises. For example, we've a new population of mousetail, of which were only 2 other sites in the county, was found at Highgate Lodge Farm in Stony Stanton by Graham Calo. It's a relative of the buttercup. And we also found a new population of field woundwort by pipistrelles at Shacklewell, and this lovely blue form of scarlet pimpernel, again at Stony Stanton by Graham Calo. There is one other interesting find, which was small flower buttercup, Ranunculus parviflorus at Sproston by Sue Dawson in 2016, but I didn't have a good photo of that, so I thought I'd mention it in passing anyway. So a lot of farmland, common farmland arable weeds are in decline, and this is a case nationally, not just in Leicestershire. Here's corn spurry, from which we had 169 tetrads in 2000, down to, I can't see what it says because I've got a pop-up, 12 tetrads in 2000 to 2019. So this has declined massively throughout the county, mainly due to intensification of farming and the application of herbicides. Now, some other plants have increased massively in farmland. This one is bristly oxtongue, 45 tetrads up to 2000, where we find there's 522. So it's quite abundant. It's ubiquitous within the county. Although in the 1950s, it was thought to be a rare weed, an alien weed confined to the south coast. So industrial and urban areas also turned up some surprises. Here we are off Centurion Way at Meridian Business Park. Found 13 plants of pyramidal orchid, Anacamptis pyramidalis, which is increasing slightly in the county. Again, I think we're creating probably habitats for this. So that's some good news. And here we are at Conkers and Caravan and Camping Site, which doesn't look very exciting. The next one. I went there with Brian Laney and Paul Stanley. Here's Brian Laney enjoying an ice cream. That's about all he eats nowadays, so if you see him, buy him one. Next slide, please. And here we found early meadowgrass, Poa infirma, which is the first county record, spreading up from its traditional heartland in the Lizard. Next one. And here we have the second county record of C. Storksbill. So these sites turned out to be very exciting, although they don't look very promising when you first go there. Next one. Another site we looked at was the old air base and then army camp at Edith Weston, where we found corn parsley, which is the first record in the county since 1967. And in one site there we found over 200 plants, which was absolutely wonderful to see. However wonderful it is to see, it's impossible to photograph. So I hope this photograph conveys it as well as we can be. Now, one plant we found at Asfordby, I was astonished to find. The next one, Steve. This is the roundleaf wintergreen, Arable Rotundifolia. I never thought I'd find this in Leicestershire at all, but it popped up in here, in this old ironworks, during a survey by Isabel from Botanic Garden, who was looking for something else, but she found this. And what a plant. I mean, this is astonishing. This is about the only one in the Midlands. The nearest record to this is Worcestershire. Next one. So how do we do? Well, Steve showed you the map from 2018, and here's the map at the end of 2019 on December. So what do? We got a good coverage, I think, for all the atlas, apart from these little red partial tetrads at the edge of the county. There are only 2 tetrads which were less than 50%. So I think we did a good job there, and not only us, all the people involved. So what's happening in VC55? What does all this tell us? Well, it tells us that there is massive change going on. In the last flora from 1988, the change was reported, but really it is absolutely massive. The settled stable textbook habitats that you find, like in ecology textbooks, really are very rare and decreasing. They're now really confined to nature reserves and triple SIs, and 1 or 2 bits of land they're in private ownership that are inaccessible to the public. Certainly marshland plants are rare and decreasing. We just don't find these on our species lists when we go out trying to refine them in areas. And arable weeds have almost gone, again as a function of the intensification of agriculture. Aquatic plants are certainly responding to nitrogenous runoff, and the taller, coarser, very dense nitrophiles are shading out and competing with the smaller, more delicate plants like sedges. Certainly rural habitats are increasing. There's much more disturbed land, so many more ruderal plants are coming in and taking a chance to use this space. And this is not only natives, but a lot of alien plants are now going through the county, which are capable of growing on these disturbed habitats. Also saline habitats are increasing, which is not a thing you'd expect in Leicestershire. We've now got about a dozen coastal plants occur on the salty verges and roadsides. And what we find really is that the urban areas are the most species rich and have the greatest biodiversity. These areas tend to be very poor nutrient, and they aren't sprayed with herbicides, so the plants don't disappear, and there are very few pesticides used, so the insects can actually pollinate the plants. So these are very good areas compared with general countryside. Oh, is this the end of an era? Well, the BSPI has some new projects. These are going to be related to the 3 new strategic areas, and the BSPI have delegated them down to each of the country committees. And the England Country Committee is still deciding what's best to do this year, but there are some ideas in progress. I don't want to talk about those now because it will take too long. What about a new flora? Well, it's possible. The last one for the 2 counties was in 1933, but we have a lot of deficiencies. And there are some very difficult groups of plants to deal with, such as elms and poplars, hawkweeds, brambles and roses. And I don't know what to do about dandelions. It's the sort of thing that would keep me awake at night if I actually thought about it, so I just try not to. There are quite a few older records to digitise. And again, one of the problems we have access to sites. So if we do go down that route, we've got to solve all these problems first, and that's not going to be easy or quick unless we put a lot of effort in and have a lot of help. So that's something to think about. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our lovely recorders. So here are, and we went out in all weathers, rain or shine, with or without footwear. Sometimes that was a bit of a problem. But last of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to Russell, who has done a massive amount of work behind the scenes, supporting us, keeping us going, keeping us enthusiastic, putting in lots and lots of records and dealing with some very difficult data scenarios that I've had to ask him to have a look at. And he's also been very good in providing links to sites and to encouraging landowners to let us on their land. So that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Virtual round of applause for Steve and Geoffrey and Helen. Thank you very much. That's really, really exciting stuff there. And again, those kind of mixed messages about things that have changed, things that are changed for the better, things that have changed for the worse, and clearly the kind of invaluable contribution of individual people all the way through. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where we kind of need to find a better way of rewarding the contribution that everybody makes, because it's something that is really, really undervalued. We couldn't get where we are without it. So Natalie, do we have any questions that we wish to ask the two presentations?
Yeah, there's some general sort of comments on the chat which are worth reading, and some sightings and some reports. But in terms of questions, for mammals, so for Helen, Rupert wondered whether the ratio between the records and the number of recorders is a way of exploring pre-post 2000 changes in species records, which may create a misleading impression of changes in status. Helen?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I wondered if you might be able to turn my video on if people do want to see me talking. Great, brilliant, thank you.
You can start it yourself. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question, Rupert. I certainly do think there is a danger of misinterpreting the data just by oversimplifying things. And I think that was one of the things I was trying to put across during the talk, that just by actually looking at the sheer number of increases of the species numbers, I think it is largely down to the number of people that are actually recording, you know, and just that accessibility of, you know, walking around with a phone, taking a photograph, you know, logging it onto a phone app. It's, you know, it's that instantaneous thing. Whereas in the past, with the best in the world, even if we went out recording stuff, we might have noted it in our little notebook, and then, you know, 5 years later, thought, oh, crikey, forgot to send that one in. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why things have changed, and it certainly needs the data to be scrutinised a lot more for us to be able to have some more definitive answers to what's happening with our mammals in Leicestershire and Rutland.
Okay, Helen, another question has just come in from Dave Robinson. He's asked, what is believed to be the main case of the decline of water voles in the Soar Valley? Mink, ? It would seem to be a good site for an attempted reintroduction programme. Any plans?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. I do think that mink were one of the contributory factors to the demise of water voles. I think sometimes it's very easy to point the finger at one thing and then think, okay, well, if we solve that, then we've solved the problem. And as we all know, it's often a myriad of things that will actually cause the demise of the water vole. I'd probably say, as well as the population's being quite isolated at the moment, one of the key things that is affecting their populations is climate change. And you will probably hear that over and over again during some of the other talks today. And what's happening with the water voles is that the water levels are going up very, very quickly. The rivers and the smaller watercourses are extremely flashy. And because the water vole obviously lives near the water, the burrows get flooded out. And not only do the burrows get flooded out, and the fields get flooded out, and then they've got nowhere to go. And they die of hypothermia. And if they're lucky, they might be able to survive in a tree for a day or so. And they're not always that lucky. So I think we would have to think very carefully to actually reintroducing them back onto the soar, because of that reason. You know, the area is prone to flooding. Having said that, though, reintroducing them or encouraging them to distribute naturally across the soar and reap valleys is an aspiration of a lot of the partnership organisations. certainly it's something that the Trust is involved in with the Soil Reek Initiative, and it's something that we're working closely with the Environment Agency with their natural flood management techniques to really sort of make those smaller watercourses more accessible for water voles. And where we know we've got isolated populations of water voles, we can increase their distribution naturally and make the associated habitats more connecting. And I think that's probably the way that I would prefer to go, rather than just reintroducing a species into an area that might not support them in the long term.
Okay, thank you, Helen. There was another question from Jack asking about, is there any historical information on where beavers lived in Leicestershire and Rutland? But I'll hold that, and then it can go forward to the breakout room. So
I think I might have to look that one up.
Yeah, exactly. Give you time to look it up. Right. So in terms of questions then for Geoffrey and Steve, Jackie's asked, how can we get a survey of our local meadows? Recent sales plus lockdown allowed several meadows to flourish unmown and grazed last summer. The resultant sward was amazing. It would be good to get an official survey this summer before the grazing animals, etc. move in.
Well, I think the first thing to do is get permission from the landowner to survey the land, unless it's public land, and then drop an email to Steve, me or Russell, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, we're always keen to get onto interesting sites. Yeah.
Okay. There's an interesting comment about Rosanna about brownfield sites, so feel free to read that. Another question from, I'm assuming it's the same Jackie. Should we dissuade or encourage the general public to plant, for example, bee bombs at random locations in the countryside? As parish heritage warden, I prefer residents not to spread commercial seed mixes along rural footpaths, but I'm happy for them to do so in, say, the churchyard. Am I right to do this, or do I need to rethink?
Well, the key there is commercial seed mixes. You don't know what's in them. Often people put in a native seed mix, what they think is natives, but they're often not. Or they may be native to Britain, but they may have come from Eastern Europe or Southern Europe and have completely different genotypes. So although it's well-meaning, it doesn't usually work, and often the plants are put into places where they might grow for, from seed for a year and then persist for a year and then disappear, which I think is probably discouraging for people, particularly if they thought that they were doing something to increase floral biodiversity and increase the number of flowers available for pollinating insects. So I would say, yes, it's a good idea to discourage that, even though it's well-meaning, and try and put people towards looking at conserving habitats and conserving areas, perhaps looking along their own verges, the road verges around their house, around the places where they live, and see if there's anything interesting there, and trying to work out whether it could be better managed, and getting in touch with their local parish or district councils and seeing if there's some way that that management could be improved, so we could improve what we have there. Planting seeds, it is, it's really a way of just making a very short-term solution. I know in Leicester we have a very good area in Knighton Green where a very, very big pollinated strip has been planted, and it had a great effect on the local people. They all thought it was great, but it does need a bit more management. Lots of people call these wild flower meadows, but they aren't really, because many of the plants that put in these mixes aren't perennial, so they don't come up year after year. They are best seen as pollinator strips, but it does encourage the public. So you have to balance the ideas of encouraging people to get involved with wildflowers, with wild plants, and also getting them to understand that there are other things that they could do which will be much more beneficial in the long term.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Geoffrey.
Good chat. Certainly we had some really very, very deep ecological thinking in terms of the botany group, and suggestion hopefully that people were talking about beavers and stuff like that. Let's hope that this chat keeps going, certainly through the next two presentations. So what we've got now then is we now have two really different but exciting talks. The first from Dave Nichols and Alan Cann on 10 years of Naturespot. We're looking forward to hearing where we've got to with that. And then Tom Bennett after that will talk about Nathusius pipistrelles and the work, survey work done at Rutland Water. Reminder again, we'll have the Q&A session, so if you've got questions, pop those in the chat box, and Natalie will run through those. And then we'll have another 20-minute session of breakout rooms with the two sets of speakers after that. If everybody's okay with that, I'm looking for Alan and Dave. Alan and Dave, are you ready to go?
If everyone can switch their cameras off, that'd be great. Thank you.
Alan is ready to go, but I've just had a panicky phone call from Dave Nichols sending his apologies because his router has failed. He can't seem to get any internet whatsoever as of about 10 minutes ago. Oh, no. So it would seem that Dave will be with us in spirit, but maybe not so much in practice. Fortunately, we did have each other's slides, so if it's okay, I will share the slides, and I think I know what Dave was going to say. Hopefully you can see the slides.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's okay, then Dave Nichols, who is the originator of Naturespot, sends his apologies. He's with us in spirit. Without more ado, we've been waiting quite a long time to give this talk, because originally we wrote it for a previous incarnation of the Recorders Conference when we called it 10 years of Naturespot, which is what it was. It's now 11 years of Naturespot, so we've got even more data that we're able to share with you. So Naturespot started in 2008, was started by Dave, and he's really the best qualified person to give you the full history of the site. But it went through several incarnations, and it was really in 2009 that the present version of Naturespot emerged as a reporting site, and it gradually changed, and it acquired various straplines like Wild Places and Wildlife of Leicestershire and Rutland, and then in 2010 it sort of settled on its present form, recording the wildlife of Leicestershire and Rutland. We are a registered charity. We are run by a board of trustees with some very familiar faces here. I'm sure many of you will know these. Dave is really the guiding light of Naturespot, having originated the site in the first place, and still spends quite a lot of his time keeping it up and running and batting away all the technical problems that arise on a fairly frequent basis to keep us going. So our aims, the aims of the charity and the aims of the website, which are the same, are to help the public to identify local wildlife. And I'll talk about identification resources a bit, and to learn about the environment surrounding them, and to really showcase both the wildlife and the wild places of Leicestershire and Rutland. And arising from that is the aim to both encourage and facilitate wildlife recording. And this has really come to be our main effort over the years, although it's possibly not how the public tend to see us. The public tend to see us more, I think, as an identification resource. What is this plant, or what is that fungus, or whatever it might be, whereas we see ourselves as encouraging people to record what they see around them. If we look at the number of records submitted year by year, you can see that there's been a fairly steady progress
in the number of records that we receive each year. Not quite even, but you can draw a straight line through this graph, and it's relatively believable, which would mean that 2020 was our biggest year ever in terms of the number of records submitted. When a record is submitted to Naturespot, all records are verified by experts, and I'll say something about who those experts are in just a minute. And there are various options that we can exercise. Now, one of the difficulties, of course, is that with an online system like Naturespot, you don't have a specimen in front of you. Although, of course, it may be that somebody has dissected an insect or a plant or whatever it was and taken photographs down the microscope. So if someone knows what they're doing, they can present all of the evidence. They can present photographs of fungal spores and measurements or whatever is needed for firm identification. But of course, it's a process of education to try and encourage people to submit the right evidence. And for the year 2020, the records that we accepted or considered correct were more than 97% of the records that we submitted. There is another category called plausible, which means that it could be correct. It looks as if it's correct, but we don't have the evidence to be sure. And that was only 1% of the records that we received in 2020. Unidentifiable, we simply don't know what they are based on what's been submitted, again around 1%. Wrong, 0.2%. We reviewed every single record of the 57,000 which was submitted in 2020, so everything was reviewed when it was submitted. Now, I think it's been a constant surprise to all of us involved in the site, these numbers. The fact that the proportion which are submitted are correctly identified by the submitter is so high, has always been, I think, quite amazing. If you're familiar with some of the places that you can find on the internet, it's always been a surprise to me that we don't get stupid records submitted. People don't submit generally records of kangaroos or elephants or whatever, but it just doesn't happen. I guess because the threshold of work involved in submitting something is just a little bit too high, not to be worth the effort for the laugh. So generally speaking, we have a very committed community of recorders who are pretty accurate in what they record. So the data that we collect goes into the iRecord database. In fact, it's submitted to the iRecord database, and we are a project, a sub-project of the Centre for Hydrology Biological Records Centre iRecord National Database. We've geofenced Leicestershire and Rutland VC55 within that. You can submit data to that database directly via the recording form on the Naturespot website or directly via the iRecord website. And if it's within the coordinates of VC55, we will see it and we will review that data. And there is some interchange between those two. Then in terms of verification, increasingly, we're seeing national recording schemes making use of the iRecord database. 4 or 5 of the national recording schemes have started taking records from iRecord in the last year or two. And I think that's a trend that will grow with time. Now, you know, submitting records electronically for some taxa is challenging, but there are ways around it if you can train your recorders. And all of the data that is accepted and has been verified goes into the NBN Atlas that some of you may be familiar with. And it also goes at the end of the year to the County Records Office and the database that Sue and her staff run there. So looking at the proportion of records which have been verified by national experts, so the national recording schemes, you can see that this has grown over the years and it's now approaching something like 7%. And as I say, I expect we will see more records coming on stream as the national recording schemes make more use of iRecord in future years. That seems to be a fairly consistent trend. Some of the experts who record particular or verify records for a particular taxa might be familiar to you. We've got people like Roger Morris for hoverflies, Gavin Broad, Helen Roy for ladybirds, Craig McAdam, various other national experts who verify things. So there is a good deal of confidence about these records. And because of the way that we use the data, all of the data that we have are publicly available one way or another. We were awarded the John Sawyer Open Data Award by the NBN last year. So we're very proud of that award, some recognition. If you look at the number of species recorded per year, you can see that that has consistently gone up year by year. And we recorded just over 4,000 species in 2020. And that again has been a fairly consistent trend over the years. What people record is quite skewed, shall we say. There are relatively small number of taxa which contribute the majority of records. So moth records, garden moth trappers and people who trap elsewhere contribute a very large number of records. We get a large number of bird records, although of course many bird records go to the Leicestershire and Rutland Ornithological Society directly. Wildflower records, we get a lot of those submitted, and so on down until you get to the more obscure taxa, things like slugs and snails, which actually we get quite a lot of records for because Dave Nichols is quite active with those. Earthworms are probably one of our most underrecorded groups. So it is very variable across the taxa, and it's related pretty much to the ease of identification, although of course moths are not necessarily that easy to identify, quite a lot of them requiring dissection in order to confirm the species. If you look at the total number of species recorded on the website for VC55, again you can see that there has been consistent growth over the years, and we are now close to 7,000 species that we have recorded across Leicestershire and Rutland. It's difficult to estimate what proportion of the total species that is in Leicestershire and Rutland. I guess it depends where you draw the line. The more microscopic you make your cutoff point, the more exponential the increase in the number of species would be. Obviously, the number of mammal species is far, far less than the number of some microfungi, for example. But consistently we are adding species year by year, and these are a few of the new records that we have added in the last year. Some of these are quite significant. Sharp-tailed bee, horseshoe ladybird. We had an enthusiastic burst of ladybird recording last year, where a number of species were recorded. Wild daffodil, zigzag elm sawfly. This might be something that will be of significance in recent years, which will possibly affect the remaining hedgerow elms that we have. Rose-coloured starlings. Across all the taxa groups, we are routinely adding new species. And one thing that we've tried to do to improve recording is to add these identification aids. And this is something that we're gradually trying to roll out across the site. But to do this in a high quality way is quite demanding, so it's taking a while. We have a traffic light system for identification difficulty, red, green and amber. and green obviously being easy and red being difficult. And we give advice, generally saying, for example, you can't do this one from a photo, or if you do take a photo, you know, we need to see the hind tibia or whatever it may be. So we try and guide recorders, and that's one reason that the records are verified correct at the sort of 97% level, because people do learn quite quickly what evidence is required. And we're adding more and more of these identification aids. So for Heliophilus, for example, we have these photographic charts which people can use to tell the difference between these really very similar species. And we're adding as many of these as we can. And here's one for flies. We've been putting some work on the Diptera in the last year or so. What species you need to look for to enable people to get their eyes in and improve their recording abilities. So we're providing these ID taxon resources as we're able to generate them. We have discussion forums where people can ask questions, show photographs. You can submit an unknown species, and if we think it's identifiable, we will say so, and if not, we will say what evidence is required when you submit a record. You don't have to know what something is when you submit a record. We have a thank you page which indicates where that species has been recorded before, whether you've recorded that species before, how many records we've had that year, and so on and so forth. There is a dashboard, a user dashboard, where you can see all of your own records and what you've recorded previously and where. We have maps, of course. You can explore the whole county, zoom in, zoom out. We've got parish pages, which are used by some wards in the city and parishes to look at what's being recorded locally. Wild places, popular places for nature recording, not all of them rural by any means, an increasing number of urban ones, particularly road verges. We have an events calendar where we try and publicize events related to wildlife recording and identification, news stories, new species, events of relevance that appear. And increasingly, we're trying to develop partnerships with various other organizations developing projects to facilitate recording. So we also provide an online platform for a lot of the natural history and wildlife groups in the country, in the county rather, if they don't have their own website or platform. So looking at the total volume of data, in 2020, we've got the website received over 1 million hits, and you can see consistently from the top graph year on year, it's a highly seasonal pattern because we're only recording from Leicestershire and Rutland. We don't consider records from anywhere else. We get relatively few records in January and February and December, and an awful lot in the summer, and that's related to maturity, flowering plants, and so on and so forth. The vast majority of the records are from the UK. Sorry, the website hits, not the records. The website hits are from the UK, but we do get people from all over the world using the website. We had a comment a couple of years ago. I use Naturespot all the time to help me identify stuff in my garden, and that was someone from New Zealand, which I found a little bit worrying. But I guess there are species in New Zealand that cross over. One interesting thing in 2020 was that we saw the reversal of a trend that we've seen over a number of years now. The number of accesses, or the proportion of accesses using mobile devices like phones and tablets, has been going up year on year. Last year, I think because so many of us were desk bound and not out and about as much as in a normal year, we did see that trend reverse. But I expect when we get on top of coronavirus, this will reverse itself again. And I think mobile access will continue to grow over the years. Where do the records come from? So the big map, the big dot map is all of the data that we hold on Naturespot. The inset map, top right, is just the data from 2020. Now, one of the interesting things, I've always found this interesting, is you can map out the county road network. You can map out the A47 and various other roads with this. You can do the same thing with buzzard records, actually. So if people weren't out in the countryside as much, they were driving around, and of course they were in the urban centres. But these dot maps are actually very, very confusing. The reason for that is people habitually go back to the same location and record over and over again. And so something that might look like a single dot, if it's on a nature reserve or a particularly prolific recorder's back garden, might actually be piled, might be dots piled a mile high. So a more accurate method of measuring the distribution is to record a heat map, look at the frequency of records. And what you see here, and this is for all taxa, is a typical recording map for the county. Doesn't matter whether it's wildflowers or birds or insects or whatever. We see these big urban areas. The Lutterworth Triangle, as a certain county recorder, I don't know if he'll own up to this, referred to it. This big agri-desert in the middle of the county, the West, which has already been referred to as under-recorded. You can see the urban centres coming up, Rutland Water, but really quite a lot of the county which is under-recorded and frankly species poor for reasons that have already been discussed. Thinking now, just turning to, for the end of the talk, for the thinking more about the recorders rather than the records. If you look at the average number of records per recorder, that has fairly consistently gone up year by year and peaked in 20. The average number of records per recorder in 2020 was over 200, and that's an average. Of course, that's quite variable. The number of active recorders, in other words, people who submit records in a given year, has also gone up year by year, peaked once again in 2020. And so I was interested in using the large data set that we've got to ask this question: what does a biological recorder actually look like? And the reason for doing this is not to be intrusive or snoop on anyone, but to see if we can recognize patterns of data submission, which will enable us to recognize people and then support them, give them the tools to help them become better recorders. So there are some caveats here. And the first thing is that the median number of records submitted to Naturespot is 2. And what that means is everyone starts off enthusiastically by submitting a record or possibly 2 records. And then most people who create an account stop there and never return, possibly because they've been browbeaten at some BioBlitz event or something else, and they never bother submitting any other records. So that's the first thing. There are a few people who submit a few records in the first year, and then more records in their second year, and then double the number of records in their third year, and so on and so forth in an even pattern, but they are very rare indeed. Now, the number of records that any one recorder submits depends very much on the taxa they record rather than the recorder, because for some taxa, it is much easier to submit large numbers of records. So if you're setting a garden moth trap and you're catching 1,000 moths a night at the heat of the season, that's a lot easier to record than it is for certain other groups, for example. So to address this, what I did was I looked at all the accounts which have 5 or more years consecutive records where people had been consistently recording, and that came to 46 records. We also used some slightly different criteria to look at the patterns of recording. And if you look at the taxa count slope, in other words, the number of different taxa that people recorded, 40 were positive, going up with time, 30 were negative, going down with time, and 1 was absolutely flat, no change at all. So there's no real consistent pattern there. So if we look at the top 9 recorders on Naturespot, this is the number of records that they're submitting each year, and say, okay, what's the pattern of our top recorders? And frankly, there isn't one. It's pretty chaotic. It goes up and down. Some people go up. People have gaps. People have holidays. Some people start off relatively low and then have a really big year. That some people go up and then down again. There really isn't any consistent pattern, and in fact I've proved that statistically. And the reason is knowing the individuals involved in some of these cases is that people's lives are unpredictable. All sorts of life events happen to people, illness, they might move away, they might change jobs, they might retire, and then they may or may not resume recording later when their circumstances change again. So unfortunately, the objective of saying, what does a biological recorder look like? The only conclusion we can draw from our data is there is no such thing as an average biological recorder. Biological recorders are rugged individuals, and long may they remain so. So that's it from me. He looks at the list of participants, hoping that Dave Nichols has been able to join us.
Dave is in.
Dave is in. So Dave, I don't know if you've got anything you wanted to add, anything I missed there?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, I managed to rejoin a few minutes ago, but my internet was in and out, so I didn't butt in. Just one point to correct. When you talked about iRecord and Naturespot and the relationship, if you submit records from Leicestershire and Rutland directly to iRecord, they're not transferred onto Naturespot. So if you want to see your records on Naturespot and to see them mapped, then please submit them through Naturespot directly.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for that tour de force, and Dave, thank you for that contribution.
Sorry, it was a little hasty. Possibly, I wasn't possibly as prepared. I was prepared with the last slides, but I winged my way through Dave's slides.
That was awesome. You couldn't see the join, Alan. Might as well just a different photo for different people. It was awesome, and I think absolutely. You know, is there anything else like this in the UK or even globally? I mean, it's an amazing resource. I used to use it for my teaching actually in Nottinghamshire, so you know, and I know you kind of mentioned New Zealand and stuff like that, so thank you so much for that. That's absolutely brilliant. And so what we'll do now is move on to Tom Bennett. Tom, if you're ready and willing to take us on a journey to Rutland Water and the Nathusius pipistrelle work.
Hopefully so. See if I can get this to share correctly. So let me know if you can.
Yeah.
Is that showing correct on yours?
It's not on. It's not presenting. Yeah, there we go. Well done.
It's presenting now.
Yeah, that's the first hurdle. Yeah, thank you, John. So just a quick introduction. I'm Tom Bennett. I'm a arboricultural consultant by day and a bat conservationist by night. So I've been doing volunteer bat work with Leicestershire and Rutland Bat Group and Derbyshire Bat Group for over 5 years now, and been involved with the Nathusius project for 4 years. The slides I'm going to go through will present. First couple of slides will be the general information for the Nathusius pipistrelle itself, and then we'll go into project detail that we've been doing at Rutland Water for the last couple of years. So Nathusius pipistrelle, or Pipistrellus nathusii, is the largest of the 3 resident pipistrelles in the UK. It's similar in appearance to the commonly found common and soprano pipistrelles, but does have some apparent differing features, such as long fur on its back, which gives it a shaggy appearance. The bat is rare in the UK, though records have increased in recent years. It's also a migratory species, although most bats are encountered in the autumn, although some do remain all year and breed in the UK. The first Nathusius pipistrelle was recorded in Great Britain, in Shetlands, in 1940. This great photo here, courtesy of Daniel Hargreaves, illustrates the size difference between the three pipistrelles. So we have common soprano, which we tend to class as a 2 to 3 finger bat, and then the bigger Nathusius, which is a bigger species all over really. So habitat. So the habitat for the Nathusius pipistrelle is predominantly deciduous mixed woodland park landscapes associated with large water bodies or large open water courses. So Rutland water being a great example of this. Food consists exclusively of flying insects, usually waterborne, non-biting midges, mosquitoes and black flies, and then to a lesser extent, caddisflies, aphids and other smaller insects. Depending on the time of year, roosts will range from bark crevices, tree holes and back boxes, and to rock crevices, sometimes in winter months. So identification features. So hand and body length is between 46 to 55 millimeters. When you compare this to common sopranos, which tend to come in at 35 to 45. Forearm length 32 to 38. Again, when you compare this, comes in at between 28 and 34. Large open wingspan 228 to 250. Again, compared to 190 to 230 for common soprano. And then a big weight variation depending at the time of year and condition of 6 to 16 grams when compared to a weight of 3 to 8 for common soprano. As illustrated on that previous picture, they're a reddish brown fur, occasionally with frosted tips on the belly and also on wing membrane. And the faces tend to be very dark, similar to common pipistrelles. We then have some more in-depth distinguishing features which we look for, which is the fifth digit divided by forearm. So this picture here from John Russ shows what we're talking about. And this is one of the most important measurements that we take when we're separating the Nathusius pipistrelle. And we take the length of the forearm, which is A, and then we take the length of the fifth finger, which is B. And when we divide these, so fifth finger divided by the forearm, if it results in a value greater than 1.25, it's normally a Nathusius pipistrelle. It can sometimes vary when we get juveniles, but it is one of the best ways of identifying them. For males, we have male genitalia, which are these white bristles, which we kindly refer to as an albino hedgehog. This tends to be the easiest and quickest way of identifying male Nathusius. And wing venation is another thing that we look at, which differs between the three species. It's not always strictly true because you can get pipistrelles that will have the same venation on both sides, separate sides, a mixture of venation. But Nathusius, for all wing venation, we're looking at this panel here. And with Nathusius, you get a break midway. And then the last one is dentition. I won't go into too much detail on dentition because it can get quite complicated. And without you, it's quite hard to get the bats to play ball as it would be when we're looking at this area. But the main differences are where we've got 0.3. This tends to be a full tooth. On other pipistrelles, it can be separate. The long, slender 0.2 and then this cusp here, which is 0.1. So echolocation. So Nathusius pipistrelles can be identified using detectors, especially their social calls, when the males tend to be calling for females. They can usually be identified by observing the frequency containing the maximum energy. So this part of the call. So here we have Nathusius at 38 to 36. Soprano pipistrelles, where we're between 55 to 60, and then common pipistrelles around about 45. And then we've got these two diagrams in the bottom, courtesy of Adrian Vicker, show the social calls that we referred to. So the first one is a typical advertising call for male, which shows 4 different components, and the rising falling trill, which is in the middle, is the key identification. And then the second one is actually 2 male Nathusius calling to each other in flight, which is quite rare because they tend to associate the call when a male pipistrelle is actually static. And hopefully, if I press this, should be able to hear it slowed down times 20. No, don't know if that worked. Let me try again. No, I don't think that's going to work, unfortunately. So the Nathusius pipistrelle project. So the national project has been running since 2014 and was launched by BCT, by the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And the aim of the project was to determine the residential breeding status of Nathusius pipistrelles in Great Britain and to determine migratory origins of Nathusius pipistrelles across Great Britain. The survey methods were to identify hotspots using acoustic records, and a lot of this was done as part of the Nathusius pilot scheme, which ran from 2009 to 2014. And at these hotspots, we were looking at using heart traps and acoustic lures to trap individuals under the national licence and ascertain their breeding status. Originally, we started collecting first samples for
Hang on, Tom. Sorry to interrupt. Tom, sorry to interrupt. Your signal.
Also collections for DNA. And that during the pre-breeding period, we would then undertake radio tracking. So the equipment used, this is a heart trap, an acoustic lure. So a heart trap consists of an aluminium frame with a series of fishing wire in between. And the bats are attracted to a social call that we play with the acoustic lure, and they fly into the string, and they slide down and sit on the line carriers, and then they'll drop into a bag beneath. And they'll happily sit here for 10, 15, 20 minutes with each other whilst we come and collect them for processing. As part of the data collection, we record as much biometric data as possible because we are handling protected species under licence. It seems sensible to get as much data as possible at that point that we are handling that. And not all of this data is used as part of the project, but it may be that it's there available if anybody else wants to use it for some studies in future time. So this is a typical recording sheet, and as part of that, we record time of capture, trap location, species, sex, reproductive status, age, forearm, and weight. And then if it's an Nathusius, we record the ringer, the ring number, wing venation we do for all 3 species of pipistrelle, 5th finger length, and then the forearm. ratio. So yeah, the processing table tends to become quite a hot spot. So the National Nathusius project so far, based on the data received from 2011 to 2019, there have been 2,689
He seems to have just gone quiet there.
So I'd lost my little screen. I didn't know whether it was carrying on. Is it still everything okay, Natalie?
Yeah, carry on. I turned your screen off just because the reception was a bit iffy.
Okay, that's threw me completely. That's
very
brilliant.
fun.
So yeah, based on the data received of April 2011 to October 2019. This is from the BCT website. There have been 2,689 enthusiasts caught, some including recaptures. 24 were currently breeding females, 456 were adult females, who showed no evidence of breeding that year, although 99 had bred in previous years. 1,872 were adult males, 302 were juveniles, and 38 didn't have their sex or age recorded. There have also been 9 long-distant migratory records. So these are bats that have either been ringed in the UK and then have been caught on the continent, or vice versa. So ringing of bats on the continent is a lot more widespread than it is in the UK. So every now and again we excitedly get bats that turn up with an identification ring on, and we find out that they've travelled some considerable distances. So onto Nathusius pipistrelles at Rutland. So trapping surveys at Rutland started in September 2014 with Matt Cook from Nottinghamshire Bat Group, and have been carried out every year since up to 2019. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and guidance from IUCN, the project's been temporarily suspended. So we didn't trap at all last year, and we are currently suspended until at least the end of spring this year. So to date, there have been 52 Nathusius caught and ringed, and some of these bats have been found in bat boxes across the nature reserve. The 5 locations that have been surveyed so far are Alberton to the west, Barnsdale and Burley to the north, Linden to the south, and then the Hambleton Peninsula. So we caught a total of 52 bats have been ringed, 50 were adults, 1 was a juvenile, 1 age was unknown or unrecorded, and of those bats, 45 were males, 7 were females. So Alberton makes up the largest part of the Rutland Water Nature Reserve. Normally a hotspot for Soprano pipistrelles, coming from maternity roots at the church. And over the years, we've only caught and ringed 2 Nathusius at this site. And these are in the background, you can see the ring numbers that associate with each pipistrelle. So Barnsdale, it's one of the quieter spots at Rutland, known for its woodland walks, located on the north shore between Burley Wood and Hambleton. And we've caught 6 bats in total, 5 males, 1 female, all adults. 5 adults, 1 age unknown. So Burley Wood, which strictly speaking is not in Rutland water, but we've had the opportunity to trap within this woodland, which is the largest ancient woodland in Leicestershire and Rutland, covering 158.3 acres, and forms part of the Burley estate. Burley Wood also has the privilege of boasting an in-hand record of Barnsdale bat. which is this great looking little fella. This is not the bat from Birdiewood, but just wanted to show you what the barbicell looks like. And there have been 9 bats in total, 8 males and 1 female, again all adults. So Linden to the south lies on the south shore and is home of famous woodland ospreys. This is the newest location, with surveys only being carried out in 2019. For some reason, I realised that when I started looking at doing the events at Rutland, that we hadn't done anything on the south shore. I didn't really know why. I don't know whether it was just access was easier to the other areas or not. So we managed to pick Linden up in 2019. And we've only trapped it once, and on that one occasion, we had 2 adult male Nathusius. So then we move on to Hambleton. So the Hambleton Peninsula has seen the most surveys, with Nathusius pipistrelle being caught in multiple locations. We tend to focus on the Hambleton Wood area to the south, as you can see here. We have also trapped in the past in Army Wood to the north, Barnhill Creek out to the east, and we have trapped dotted about this area as well, but we've never caught anything here. And it's obviously a stone's throw across to Barnsdale. So 33 bats have been caught in total at Hambleton, with 28 of these being males, 5 being females, 32 being adults, and 1 being a juvenile. When I refer to juveniles, it may be that we have caught other bats later on in the season that were actually juveniles, but we tend to get past the end of September, and it starts to become a lot harder to tell whether they're juveniles or adults from that year. So just a few photos of some of Rutland's residents. So this is the first bat from, this one's called Hambleton, I believe. This one is one of the bats from Linden. One from Barnsdale, and this one was from Birdiewood, all supporting their nine and hopefully in the future. And just a quick few thank yous. First one, obviously, to Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust for allowing us to have access to Rutland and do this trapping over the years. And then the last one, to the 4 main bat groups that tend to be involved. We always have a yearly get together with the 4 bat groups, with people coming across as far as Lincolnshire and people from Nottinghamshire, and the motley crew as it would be from the last survey.
John, thank you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And it's a fascinating insight that we can get from single species and even single sex analysis. And I think it's a really undervalued aspect of conservation data is actually understanding, kind of the niche space and geographical space. And even indeed, as you've highlighted there, just some of the tremendous journeys that some of these species take that we simply don't even think about. We kind of think that they're resident and they don't go very far, but in fact, as you've already shown, they can pop up in the most unusual and unexpected places. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. Now, Natalie, over to you. Do we have any questions for folks?
Right, so just having a look, there's quite a few comments about how great Naturespot is and it should exist in every county. So if people want to have a read of those, feel free. There has been a question saying that from Sally Cunningham, she says that she doesn't have a smart mobile, so she finds the traffic light system infuriating. especially when she sees a species she knows well, which is some distance away, but then she needs a photograph which she doesn't have. Does anyone else have this problem, or is it just because she's low/no tech?
If I could just say that the criteria used for verification are quite complicated. We do look at a number of different factors. Obviously, the evidence that someone has submitted with a record, but we also look at the recorder's experience. So if we've got a recorder who has recorded a particular species many times before, we may well be inclined to accept that record without a photograph if we know that they're very familiar with that species, for example. But it all depends on the species, the rarity of the species, or how common it is, and various factors. So a photograph is not absolutely necessary. It is necessary for the more challenging species, or where maybe someone hasn't recorded a particular species before, in order that we can verify that they are being accurate in what they're seeing.
Okay.
And we like photographs. I think the photographs, I think other people, Naturespot's very good wallpaper. I think people like to see photographs on the site. Then they also like to see the seasonality. You know, when the lesser celandines open up after the winter we've had, everyone likes to see that, you know. So the return of the swallows, all of that sort of thing. We don't get many photographs of swallows. They're quite difficult to take photographs of.
Brilliant. Helen has put a comment saying, mammal challenge to hit the 1,000 mark this year. Over to you. Remember, common is good and well as rare. So yes, because Naturespot support the Leicestershire and Rutland mammal group, so they're hosting our page and everything on there. So Helen's putting a challenge to you guys.
Can I just add a comment to that mammals obviously are very hard to spot, so if you're waiting to see one, there won't be many records, but it's acceptable to record mammals by observing their tracks and signs. So the obvious one is moles. I don't suppose many of us have ever seen a mole, yet it's probably the commonest mammal in the county, but we've all seen molehill. So a fresh molehill is fine to use as the basis for a record. And you can do the same with other mammals, you know, from the tracks, droppings in some cases.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just add to that? You know, if we can get photographs of the field signs, it is a great help. You know, at this time of year, with there being so much mud around, you know, it's been one of the main ways that I've been going out and identifying certain, you know, species, particularly the deer, the foxes, and the badger paw prints. You know, they're really obvious just along the edges of the field. So if you're not sure of what they are, then just take a photograph. You know, whether you take a photograph from it in a normal phone and then load it up onto the Naturespot website, or via your mobile phone, and you know, we'll gladly take a look at it. We're going to put some ID photographs on the website as well, and we can put some cross references there. So sorry to hijack this bit, but yeah, sorry. Yeah, great stuff to get you all out there and meeting that challenge.
Okay, so there were the questions so far for Naturespot, but no doubt the conversation will carry on in the breakout rooms. So for Tom, there's a question from Nicola Bashforth saying, is the male to female ratio the same as for the other pipistrelles?
I don't know without looking at the data.
I was a bit, when I saw that question, I thought, oh no. From what I remember, I think we definitely get more males. Don't you think? Of other species.
Yes, there is a sex bias to males, which is odd as well, in that the acoustic law call that we play is a male advertisement call. Yet we catch more males. So whether that's because the males are more interested in what other males are around and the females are just like, oh, I'm not bothered. But yeah, the sex bias tends to be more males.
I wondered as well as if the females are in the catch bags emitting calls, it might be luring the males in. Maybe. And the next question from Jackie saying, bat detection devices, is the Echometer Touch 2 a good purchase for a complete novice wanting to get an idea of which type of bats are visiting the local area?
Yes, I have actually got one of the first Echometer Touches, which I still use all the time. I think they're brilliant. My only warning would be, don't read into the auto ID too strictly. It's great for your common species, as it would be, but if you all of a sudden have barberstells and lesser horseshoes appearing in your garden, then yeah, don't look into it too much. But yeah, they are a brilliant bit of kit.
I think as well with any bat detector that's got a screen with sonograms, it's some people get too focused on looking at the screen and forget to actually watch the bat and how it flies and how it feeds and how it forages. So it's just remembering to look up. But yeah, they Echometer Touch good, and they do an Android version now as well as for iPhones. So yeah, so I think that's it for now. But yeah, we'll carry on discussions in the breakout rooms. Fingers crossed.
I forgot to say thank you both to kind of David and Alan and Tom, and virtual applause for their presentations. What we have now is a quick 5 minutes from Claire Sambridge to give an overview of her work on the Soarenreek Valley living landscape. So Claire, are you there and ready to go?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I am here and hopefully ready to go. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see how that works. Somebody give me a thumbs up that we've got that.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thanks very much, everybody. So yeah, my name's Claire Sambridge, and I have recently joined Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust as the Conservation Officer for the Soarenreek living landscape. I was previously at Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust for a number of years, but have moved in lockdown, so it's been a bit of a challenge, and I haven't been out and about as much as I would like, but this is a great opportunity to just say hello, really. So hopefully you can get a bit of a sense of a face and a name, and really just talk about the area that I will be working in once I'm allowed to get out and about. So all I wanted to really share with you was kind of what do we mean by the Soarenreek living landscape, where is it, and just a quick heads up on some project activity that we're undertaking. Some of you I will have spoken to already, some of you I haven't met yet and would love to meet in person at some point, and hopefully as the year progresses there'll be more opportunities to meet up face to face and have those over a cup of coffee chats or wandering around a site chats with as many of you as possible. So I look forward to that. So the Soarenreek living landscape is an area that's been identified by the Trust for quite some time as being really important, and it's kind of defined by the main river valleys of the Soarenreek, as the name suggests, which is the sort of the purple Y shape that you can hopefully see on the map there. But also, I think very well aware, and I've been working for some time under the catchment-based approach principle of everything that's happening in terms of our river systems within a whole catchment can influence across the whole area. So all those pale blue lines that you see squiggles running in, that indicates how much connectivity there is within our river systems across Leicestershire. So the Soarenreek is only Leicestershire. Rutland, actually, all the water that falls in Rutland drains the other way towards sort of Rutland and is in a different river catchment system. So what we're hoping for, and what our aim and our vision for the landscape, is that it's fully connected. So it's about our habitats and species thriving, but it's about people's connection, and just hearing from all of you today how connected you are with your local patches, and the real detail of the wildlife that you're going out and recording. It's really inspirational to for people who are out in such detail and with such kind of passion. And yes, just the amount that you're recording is amazing, and it's kind of the people make up the living landscape as much as the habitats and the species as well. So that's kind of our vision, and that's what I'll be working on in the months and years to come in that general area, but anything in the kind of the wider countryside, linking up and trying to work for the benefit of our wildlife populations and our communities. And I'm not going to take up too much time today, but I did want to share with you, some of you are aware, but it's maybe new to some of you, that we're trying to develop a project that we're calling Saving the Soar's Struggling Species, which is a bit of a mouthful. But ultimately, we want to take this landscape scale approach and look at 3 key species. And in the first presentation today, we heard from Helen about water vole and the fact that they are endangered in terms of the red list. But one of the 3 species that we've selected to really be indicators of the health of rural habitats, our farmland, when we're thinking barn owls mostly, our river habitats for water vole, and our urban habitats for swift. And we're looking to set up a project, and we're hoping for something big scale, landscape scale, where we could really potentially make a really big difference for these species and lots of multiple benefits. So working in partnership, building on existing programs of recording and potential nest box provision, things like that. There's lots of great stuff happening already, and we want to see if we can't build on and expand that, pull partners together and give people the opportunity to get involved in some real kind of really impactful delivery that will help these species and help our habitats. Now, it's still very early days. We're in the project development phase very much, where we are mapping out key threats, mapping out behaviours, and starting to think about work stream development, things that we could be doing if we were to be able to put in a big funding bid and get an injection of money in, an injection of capacity potentially with some more people on the ground to get out and deliver some really good projects. So where we're at is we've done some initial stakeholder work, and I'll be summarising that information over the next month or so, and I'll be able to circulate around a bit of an update as to where we're at. And really, my kind of ask today is that if you're interested, that just kind of get in touch, drop me an email, drop me a phone call, or if you kind of don't have my email address, it's on the screen there, or you can ask Natalie, email the Wildlife Trust on any of the trust email addresses that you might have, and that'll get through to me. But if you're interested in barn owl, water vole, swift, getting involved at any of this stage of this project, or would like to just be kept up to date on things, then give me a shout. That's really kind of where we're at. I can see a few people saying they're interested, which is great. So absolutely fantastic. At the moment, I've not been able to get out and about and visit people, but certainly in the future, I'm happy to come out and about, meet people, talk about your local patch and see what's going on. And John, thank you. You've just popped my email address up there in the chat as well. So don't want to take up too much more time. Happy to take any questions, but also mindful of my stomach rumbling. So I suspect other people's might be as well. We're moving on towards lunch. So great to meet you all. As I say, really inspirational hearing about the recording work that's going on, and I look forward to meeting with and working with a lot of you over the coming time. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back in. Stop sharing.
Okay, Claire, thank you very much for that. That's really invigorating, and it's a great example, isn't it, of how we can make use of the data that people are collecting and putting out there, and that's really important. Natalie, I don't know whether you want to say anything before I finish off and wrap up.
Just thank you everybody for coming and the speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just some key messages then, I think, that have come out from today have been obviously the unstinting contributions of individuals, throughout all of this, every little helps, and everybody's put a lot in to saving species in some way, shape or form. I think there's a really important thing here about we've identified, haven't we, some really important challenges for conservation about the messages that are coming out here. There are some favourable messages and some really alarming messages about declines and change, and the rapidity of change. And I think one of the challenges we face over the next years in this UN decade of ecological restoration is how do we bend the curve, the curve of decline, and restore a wildlife-rich landscape in the future. And we can't obviously do that without knowing what's there. And we also can't do it if we're not alert to the curse of good intentions, which is something that I think came through a couple of presentations in particular. Things like the right tree in the right place. Well, in fact, it should be the right place for the right tree. And think about it that way around first. And the issues of people planting exotics because they look attractive, and what can come with those exotics, and also these things like the pollinator mixes, and we don't want to prevent people from doing the right thing, do we? We want to encourage people, but we need to be careful about the kind of the messages that we put out there. But the critical thing, I think, in all of this is, everybody's record is important. It doesn't matter whether you think it's common or it's rare. If we don't look after it, it will be rare. And if we don't look after it and it gets rare, it will disappear. Or indeed, there will be species that we're not alert to that are coming in, and we need to be aware of their presence, and the fact that they will be a part of the future biodiversity of this landscape. And I wanted to finish with, in terms of the messages, a couple of things, which is, forgive me, I can't for the life of me remember the name of the farmer in Norfolk who in something like 1782 started effectively, was it Masham? Is it Thomas Masham, or was it Masham Farm? I can't remember. Started this process of phenology simply by recording what was on his farm, and that started this whole process of awareness, of species and the link to seasons and things like that. But also this awareness of climate change actually, in many respects, has only come because of bird watchers and all of the data that has been published through the bird watching, highlighting the climate change. So, even from small things, big things can change. So I think there's a really, really important messages there. Every little helps, and the fantastic stuff that you've been doing, let's long may that continue, because from a wildlife trust perspective, if we don't know what's there, then we can't possibly help to save it, or indeed embrace it. So final thanks then, very quickly. Thank you to the speakers, to Helen, Steve, Geoffrey, Alan, Dave, Tom and Claire, for some really invigorating, exciting, interesting talks. And I think they've been they've been really enthusing, and lots of detail, a bit of humour kicking around, and fantastic photos. Thank you especially to the organisers, Natalie and Harriet, and whoever else has been in the background making this happen. With apologies, obviously, thank you for bearing through the technical issues that one or two of us, me especially, have for some reason had a user error issue kicking around. I want to thank you as the audience for your contributions, clearly, and that's absolutely fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed it. Want to thank all of the recorders and the volunteers, those folks who aren't here, who couldn't be here, because without your contributions, even this couldn't have happened, the background data and all that sort of stuff. And I want to thank you for being with us and look forward to have a great wildlife recording year. The thing I said before, let's fall in love with the future again and go out and about and enjoy what's out there. So look forward to seeing you in 2022, if I dare mention that as a year. But thank you, everybody, and have a good day, and look forward to it next time.